They chained my driveway at 6 in the morning, but the part that made everyone regret it was not the chain. It was the road underneath it. The first sound I heard was metal scraping against metal, sharp enough to cut through sleep, followed by a hollow clang that rolled across my front yard like someone had just locked a prison gate. I opened my eyes in the dark of my bedroom, waiting for the sound to come again, hoping for 1 second that it was just a garbage truck or a contractor unloading tools or some early morning mistake that had nothing to do with me. Then came the second clang. Slower, heavier, deliberate. I got out of bed before the sun had cleared the rooftops, pulled on jeans, stepped in my boots, and walked through the hallway while the old floorboards creaked under me. The house was quiet, too quiet. That kind of quiet that does not feel peaceful. It feels like the world is holding its breath right before somebody crosses a line they cannot uncross. When I opened the front door, cold morning air hit my face, damp from last night's rain. The gravel driveway glistened under the weak gray light, and 10 yards from my porch, stretched across the only entrance to my property, was a steel gate that had not been there when I went to sleep. Fresh black posts had been drilled into the ground on both sides. A heavy chain wrapped through the center. Orange warning tape fluttered from the top bar, and zip-tied to the chain was a laminated sign that read, "Unauthorized access closed pending HOA compliance review." For a few seconds, I did not move. My truck sat behind the gate, useless. My mailbox was on the other side. The county road was on the other side. Everything I needed to leave my own property was on the other side. Then I saw her. Linda Whitmore stood across the street in white tennis shoes, cream slacks, and a navy HOA blazer that looked too official for someone whose real power came from bothering retired people about mailbox colors. Her silver hair was tucked perfectly behind her ears. Her clipboard was pressed against her chest like a shield. And on her face was that small, satisfied smile she wore whenever she believed someone had finally been corrected. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked like she had been waiting. I walked down the porch steps slowly, boots crunching against wet gravel, and stopped in front of the gate. The steel still smelled fresh, like cut metal and cheap paint. Whoever installed it had worked fast, probably before sunrise, probably paid in cash, probably told not to ask too many questions. I ran one hand across the chain. Cold. New. Real. I looked over at Linda. "You put a gate across my driveway." She lifted her chin slightly, like she had practiced that exact moment in a mirror. "The board has determined that your access point creates a community safety concern, Ethan." She said my name like it was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. I looked at the sign again. Community safety concern. That was always how Linda did it. She never said control. She said standards. She never said punishment. She said review. She never said she wanted you gone. She said the neighborhood needed consistency. I bought that house 8 months earlier because it sat at the edge of the subdivision, backed by old trees, with just enough distance from the rows of matching roofs to feel separate. The previous owner had warned me that the HOA liked to pretend the whole area belonged to them. I thought he was exaggerating. He was not. The first letter came 3 weeks after I moved in. Grass height. The second came 2 days later. Exterior color deviación. The third accused my gravel driveway of lowering community appearance value, even though the driveway had been there longer than half the houses on the street. I ignored the first few. Then Linda started showing up in person. She stood at the edge of my property line with that clipboard, never stepping onto my land, always smiling, always saying things like, "We just want to keep Willow Creek beautiful," and everyone here agreed to certain expectations. I reminded her every time that my parcel was not inside the HOA boundary. She reminded me every time that the neighborhood considered my property visually connected. Visually connected. That was the kind of phrase Linda could say without laughing. Now she had gone. From letters to steel. I stepped closer to the barrier and looked at the ground near the left post. The installer had drilled directly beside the old survey marker, a small rusted cap, half buried near the edge of the gravel. Most people would miss it. Linda had probably thought it was trash. I knew exactly what it was. I had spent months reading everything tied to this land before I signed the purchase papers. Not because I expected a war with an HOA president in pearl earrings, but because my father taught me one lesson about property that stayed with me longer than anything else. Never trust a fence more than a survey. And never trust a smile more than a recorded document. Linda crossed the street, stopping just far enough away to pretend she was being respectful. You were given multiple opportunities to comply. With what? She blinked. With community standards. I am not in your community. Her smile thinned. You benefit from our road maintenance, our appearance standards, our shared infrastructure. I looked past her toward Willow Creek Lane. The street curved gently through the subdivision, lined with identical mailboxes, trimmed hedges, polished SUVs, and sprinklers that always seemed to run 10 minutes longer than the county recommended. It looked clean, ordered, expensive, and underneath all of it was the part Linda had never bothered to understand. The road did not begin where she thought it began. The drainage did not run where she thought it ran. The utilities did not cross only land the HOA controlled. And the access route she had just blocked was tied to something much bigger than my driveway. I looked back at her. Who approved this? The board. County permit number. Her smile froze for half a second. This is an internal HOA matter. No, Linda. I tapped the chain once with 2 fingers. This is attached to land records now. For the first time, her eyes flicked down toward the ground, then to the posts, then back to me. It was quick, almost nothing, but I saw it. She did not know. That tiny little flash of uncertainty told me she had built the gate first and checked the authority later. Maybe not even later. Maybe she believed authority came from confidence, signatures, and the fear most people felt when official-looking paper showed up in their mailbox. The problem was I was not most people. Behind her, a garage door opened. Mr. Patterson from 3 houses down stepped out in a robe, holding a coffee mug, staring at the gate like his brain had not fully accepted what his eyes were seeing. A delivery van slowed at the corner, paused, then backed up awkwardly when the driver realized the entrance was blocked. A woman jogging with a golden retriever stopped near the sidewalk, took one look at Linda, then one look at me, and pretended not to be watching. The neighborhood was waking up. Good. Linda lowered her voice. Ethan, this does not need to become dramatic. It already became dramatic when you hired someone to chain my only way out while I was sleeping. You can request a review at the next board meeting. I almost laughed. The next board meeting. She really believed I was going to stand there, trapped behind a homemade checkpoint, waiting 2 weeks for permission to use my own driveway. Instead, I nodded. Once. Slowly. That seemed to please her. She mistook silence for surrender. People like Linda always did. I turned away from the gate and started walking back toward the house. She called after me. That is the right decision, Ethan. I stopped halfway up the porch steps. No, Linda. I looked back at the chain, then at the street, then at the line of houses beyond it. It is just a quiet one. Her smile faded. I went inside and closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, I moved. Not fast, not angry, precise. I walked straight to the back room, the one I used as an office, where rolled surveys, county filings, easement records, utility maps, and old purchase documents sat in labeled tubes along the wall. I pulled the first tube from the rack and laid the survey across the table, flattening the corners with 2 heavy books. There it was, Parcel 17B, my property, and running along the edge of it, narrow enough to ignore, but important enough to ruin Linda's morning, was the recorded access strip. I pulled a second file, 1992 Easement Agreement. The paper smelled old, dry, official. I flipped to the page. I had marked months earlier, back when the clause had seemed interesting but not urgent. Then I read the sentence again. Access to adjoining residential parcels shall remain uninterrupted through the designated easement area, and any obstruction, alteration, or restriction affecting such access shall require county review and written authorization. I read it twice, then a third time. Outside, the chain rattled again in the wind. I looked through the window toward the street Linda thought she controlled. Every homeowner on that lane used the same road. Every delivery truck, every contractor, every emergency vehicle, every utility crew. The gate across my driveway was not just blocking me. It had been installed on the access dependency that kept the entire street legally functional. Linda had not trapped me. She had trapped herself. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. Do you know why the road entrance is blocked? Then another. Is the HOA allowed to do this? Then one from Mr. Patterson. Ethan, did Linda do this? I did not answer. Not yet. Because the strongest move in a situation like this is not the first response. It is letting the wrong person believe they are still winning while the paper trail wakes up behind them. I gathered the survey, the easement, the utility map, and the county maintenance agreement. Then I placed them in a folder and wrote one word across the tab. Access. By the time I put on my jacket, the sun had finally risen over Willow Creek. Through the front window, I could see Linda standing beside the gate again, talking to two neighbors, one hand raised in that calming gesture people use when they're creating the exact problem they're trying to explain. I opened the door. The cold air came in again. This time I smiled, because Linda had built a gate across my driveway. But I just found the clause that could shut down her entire street. I did not call the police. That was the first thing Linda got wrong. People like her expected emotional reactions. Anger. Threats. Raised voices. They understood confrontation because confrontation gave them something to manage. What they never understood was silence backed by paperwork. I sat at the kitchen counter with the folder open beside me while the neighborhood slowly unraveled outside my windows. Every 20 minutes, another vehicle approached the entrance, stopped at the barrier, then either backed up awkwardly or parked while the driver tried to figure out what the hell was happening. The sound of irritated car horns started before 8 in the morning. By 8:15, people were already gathering near the gate. By 8:30, Linda had lost control of the tone. I could hear it through the walls, even with the windows closed. Frustrated voices. Questions repeated louder every time she failed to answer them clearly. Somebody slammed a car door hard enough to echo down the street. Somebody else yelled that they were late for work. Another homeowner demanded to know why emergency access was restricted. Linda kept using the same phrases. Temporary compliance action. Community review. Safety concern. The problem was those phrases sounded official during HOA meetings. They sounded ridiculous when people were trapped in their own subdivision before breakfast. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. I finally picked it up and looked at the notifications. 7 text messages. 2 missed calls. 1 voicemail from a contractor asking whether the road closure was temporary because his crew could not get equipment through. I listened to the voicemail once, then deleted it. Outside, another horn blasted. Longer this time. More aggressive. I stood up, grabbed the folder, and walked back into my office. The county records sat spread across the desk, exactly where I had left them. Easement agreements, utility layouts, maintenance boundaries, drainage responsibility maps. The deeper I looked, the worse Linda's situation became. Willow Creek Lane was maintained through a layered agreement involving county oversight, utility access protections, and a shared easement corridor that partially crossed my parcel boundary. Linda probably believed she had blocked a private driveway. In reality, she had interfered with legally protected access infrastructure connected to every property on that street. That was not an HOA disagreement anymore. That was county territory. I pulled my laptop closer and opened the county planning database. Parcel maps loaded slowly across the screen. Colored boundary lines appeared one by one. My property, the access strip, the roadway designation, then the notation I had been hoping to find. Emergency service dependency route. I leaned back in my chair and stared at it for several seconds. Linda had not just created an inconvenience. She had interfered with a designated emergency access dependency tied to multiple residences. Fire response, utility response, medical access. Everything crossed that section, and now there was a steel gate sitting directly on top of it because a woman in a navy blazer thought she could bully somebody through paperwork and intimidation. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Outside, voices rose again. I walked toward the front window and looked through the blinds. About 15 people stood near the entrance now, some still in work clothes, some holding coffee mugs, some clearly irritated enough to stop pretending they supported the HOA. Linda stood in the middle of them with her clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. Her posture was still controlled, but I could see the difference now. Faster movements. Sharper gestures. The first cracks. Mr. Patterson pointed directly at the chain while speaking loud enough for half the street to hear. Linda answered quickly. He shook his head immediately. A younger woman beside him folded her arms and stepped closer, clearly joining the argument. Two delivery trucks waited at opposite ends of the road. Neither driver looked happy. One of them finally turned around and left. That was when I made the call. Not to the sheriff, not to a lawyer, to county infrastructure compliance. The woman who answered sounded exhausted before I even finished introducing myself. Probably because people only called her department when something expensive or stupid had happened. Sometimes both. I gave her the parcel number first, then the easement designation, then the obstruction description. Her keyboard clicking stopped halfway through my explanation. She asked me to repeat the parcel number. I did. Another pause. Then she asked a very different question. Is the obstruction currently preventing unrestricted vehicle access to all adjoining residences connected through the dependency corridor? I looked out the window toward the line of waiting vehicles. Yes. The silence on the other end changed. Not confusion anymore. Procedure. I explained exactly what had been installed. Stilgata. Chain. No visible county permit. HOA signage only. She asked whether emergency vehicles could currently pass through without delay. I told her not without removing the barrier. Another pause. Papers shifting. More typing. Then finally the sentence I'd been waiting for. Someone from county assessment will be dispatched this morning. I thanked her and ended the call. Outside, the pressure kept building. A landscaping crew arrived with a trailer full of equipment, only to discover they could not enter. One worker got out and stared at the gate with both hands on his hips while another started recording video on his phone. Linda noticed the camera immediately and turned away from it. Smart move. Too late. The neighborhood no longer looked polished and controlled. It looked irritated, delayed, embarrassed. I stepped onto the porch for the first time since making the call. The air smelled like wet asphalt warming under sunlight. The chain rattled lightly in the breeze. Conversations stopped the moment people noticed me. Linda turned too. Her expression hardened the second our eyes met. Ethan, her voice carried across the street. We are handling this internally. I walked down the porch steps slowly. No sudden movements. No anger. Just calm enough to make everybody pay closer attention. Internally stopped applying the moment you blocked county access infrastructure. A few heads turned toward Linda immediately. Her jaw tightened. This is HOA property management. No. I shook my head once. This is recorded easement interference. That sentence landed exactly the way I hoped it would. Confusion spread first, then concern. People did not understand legal terminology completely, but they understood tone. And my tone sounded like somebody who already knew how this ended. Linda stepped closer. You are escalating this unnecessarily. No. I looked directly at the chain. You escalated it when you installed a steel barrier without county authorization. Another homeowner turned toward Linda instantly. Wait, there was no county approval. Linda answered too quickly. The board reviewed the matter. That was not the question. Mr. Patterson's voice cut across the street sharp enough to stop everyone else from talking. Did you get county approval? Linda's silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. It felt much longer. The crowd noticed. That was the moment the balance shifted. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. You could feel it moving under the surface like pressure inside a pipe before it bursts. Linda looked back at me again, and this time the confidence in her face was fighting something new. Calculation. She was trying to figure out how much I knew. The answer was more than she wanted. Much more. A siren sounded faintly somewhere beyond the subdivision. Not close yet, but getting closer. And for the first time all morning, Linda stopped talking completely. The county vehicles arrived 12 minutes later. 2 white trucks with orange department seals rolled slowly into Willow Creek, like they already knew nobody was going to enjoy what happened next. The first truck stopped near the barrier. The second parked farther back near the line of waiting cars. The moment the engines shut off, the entire street went quiet. Not normal quiet. Nervous quiet. The kind where everybody suddenly realizes the situation became real faster than expected. The first inspector stepped out holding a clipboard thicker than Linda's entire sense of authority. Mid-50s, sunburned neck, reflective vest, heavy boots. The kind of man who looked like he had spent 20 years dealing with people who thought rules only applied to other people. He did not introduce himself. He walked straight toward the gate. Linda moved instantly to intercept him. Her smile returned too fast, too polished. "Good morning. We are currently handling an internal HOA compliance matter." The inspector did not even slow down. "Is this obstruction permitted through county authorization?" Linda hesitated, just slightly. That tiny pause was enough. The inspector looked at the chain, then the posts, then the warning sign, then at the row of trapped vehicles behind him. His expression flattened immediately. He crouched beside the left post and touched the base where the steel had been drilled into the ground. Then he looked toward the old survey marker. I watched his eyes narrow slightly. He saw it too. Linda kept talking. "The board approved this temporary action because of ongoing compliance violations." The inspector finally looked at her. "County permit number." Linda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We were advised this fell under HOA authority." "By who?" Another pause. That answer never came. The inspector stood up slowly and wrote something on his clipboard. Around us, neighbors leaned forward like spectators at a fight finally reaching the first punch. Mr. Patterson folded his arms harder across his chest. The younger woman from earlier took out her phone and started recording openly now. Nobody tried to stop her. The inspector turned toward me. "You filed the obstruction complaint?" "Yes." "You the property owner for parcel 17B?" "Yes." He held out one hand. "Documentation." I handed him the folder. He flipped through the easement agreement first, then the county utility maps, then the maintenance corridor designation. I watched the exact moment the situation fully clicked inside his head. His eyebrows lifted once. Just once. Then he looked over his shoulder toward the rest of the street. "How many residences depend on this corridor?" 23. Linda answered quickly before I could. "Approximately 23 homes." The inspector stared at her for a second. "You knew this was a shared dependency corridor." Linda swallowed visibly. "It is still within the visual management area of the HOA." That was the wrong answer. You could actually feel the temperature change in the crowd after she said it. Because even the homeowners who normally supported HOA rules suddenly understood something important. Linda was still talking about appearance, while county officials were talking about legal access infrastructure. Those two things did not belong in the same conversation. The second inspector approached carrying a camera and started photographing the barrier from multiple angles. The chain, the posts, the warning sign, the survey marker. Every click of the camera sounded louder than it should have. Linda stepped toward him instinctively. "Is all of this really necessary?" He ignored the question and took another picture. The first inspector handed my documents back to me carefully. Then he looked directly at Linda again. "Who installed the obstruction?" "A contractor hired by the board." "Names?" "I do not have that information with me right now." "Then you should probably get it." His voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse. Because calm authority leaves no room for argument. Behind the inspectors, another car horn sounded from the growing line at the entrance. Then another. A school bus had stopped 2 blocks down because it could not pass cleanly through the narrowed access point created by the parked vehicles. Parents started stepping outside their homes now, trying to figure out why traffic had completely stalled inside the subdivision. The entire neighborhood was watching. Linda finally seemed to realize that. Her posture changed again, less controlled, more defensive. She turned toward the crowd. "Everyone please remain calm while we sort this out." Nobody answered her. That silence hurt her more than yelling would have. The inspector pointed toward the barrier. "This obstruction requires immediate removal pending county review." Linda blinked hard. "Immediate?" "Yes, but we still need time to discuss." "No." His tone sharpened for the first time. "You needed county authorization before installation. You do not get discussion time after obstructing a dependency route tied to emergency access." Several people in the crowd reacted immediately to the phrase emergency access. You could hear the mood changing in real time now. Confusion becoming anger, anger becoming blame. One homeowner stepped forward. "Wait a second. You blocked emergency access over HOA violations. Linda turned toward him quickly. It was never intended to affect emergency response. The inspector interrupted her immediately. Intent is irrelevant. The obstruction exists. That sentence landed like a hammer. Linda's face lost color. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely uncertain. Not irritated, not defensive, uncertain. The second inspector walked farther down the road, placing temporary orange assessment markers along the edge of the corridor. Every marker drew more attention from homeowners watching through windows and standing on driveways. Willow Creek no longer looked like a wealthy, organized subdivision. It looked like the scene of an infrastructure investigation. And technically, that was exactly what it had become. I stayed quiet while the inspectors worked. That part mattered. People expect revenge to look emotional. Real leverage usually looks patient. Linda finally turned back toward me. You could have handled this privately. I almost laughed. You chained my property while I was asleep. Her jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. No. I looked toward the growing line of frustrated residents. I'm just watching consequences catch up. That hit harder than I expected. Several people nearby heard it. Nobody defended her. That was another important shift. Earlier that morning, Linda still had supporters. Now she only had silence. The first inspector pulled a form from his clipboard and started filling it out. Unauthorized obstruction, restricted dependency access, potential emergency route interference. He read each line while writing it. Not for drama, for documentation. But hearing the phrases out loud made the entire situation sound much worse than it had an hour earlier. Because now it was official language. Official language scares people, especially people who spent years pretending HOA paperwork carried the same weight as government authority. A county tow vehicle has been requested. The inspector said it casually while still writing. Linda stared at him. Tow vehicle, unless the obstruction is voluntarily removed immediately. The silence after that sentence stretched across the whole street. Then somebody behind Linda muttered, "Oh my God." Another homeowner cursed under his breath. Mr. Patterson shook his head slowly like he still could not believe this had actually happened. Linda looked around at all of them, probably searching for support, but every face she found looked frustrated instead of loyal. She had finally reached the worst possible moment for someone like her. The moment authority stops looking impressive and starts looking embarrassing. The inspector capped his pen and looked at her one last time. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have two options. Remove the obstruction now, or we escalate this to formal county enforcement." And suddenly, for the very first time since that chain went up, Linda Whitmore looked scared. Linda looked around the street one more time like she still expected somebody to step in and save her authority before it collapsed completely. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. That part seemed to hit harder than the inspectors did. HOA power only works when people willingly participate in the illusion. The second that illusion cracks, everything underneath starts looking very small. Linda finally forced a tight smile back on her face and straightened her blazer. If removing the barrier resolves the situation, then obviously we are willing to cooperate. The inspector did not react to the performance. Good. He checked his watch. Then I suggest you cooperate quickly. Linda turned toward one of the men standing near the sidewalk. "Carl, get the contractor back here immediately." The man looked uncomfortable before answering. He is not answering his phone. Of course he was not. Nobody wanted their name attached to what this had become. Linda's composure slipped again for half a second. "Fine. Then get bolt cutters from maintenance." A low murmur moved through the crowd after that. Hearing the HOA president order her own gate cut apart in front of the entire neighborhood felt surreal enough that several people actually pulled out phones to record. Linda noticed every single camera. Her face tightened more each time. The second inspector continued placing assessment markers down the roadway, while the first began documenting vehicle buildup and restricted turning access. Every step they took made the situation feel less like neighborhood drama and more like a county violation scene. A woman near the back of the crowd finally spoke up loud enough for everyone to hear. "My husband missed an airport run because of this." Another voice answered immediately. "My daughter's school bus could not get through." Somebody farther back added, "What if an ambulance needed access?" That one changed everything again. You could actually feel the emotional direction of the crowd turn in real time. Earlier people were irritated. Now they were angry. Not at me. At Linda. She heard it too. You could see it in the way her shoulders tightened every time another complaint reached her. People who had smiled beside her at HOA barbecues now stared at her like she had embarrassed the entire neighborhood. The inspector walked back toward the barrier. "Mrs. Whitmore, until this obstruction is removed, the county will continue treating the corridor as compromised infrastructure." Linda nodded quickly. "Understood. We are handling it now." "No." He pointed toward the gate. "You are correcting it now." Another important difference. Linda swallowed hard. One of the maintenance workers finally returned carrying large bolt cutters from the HOA utility shed. The moment he approached the chain, all conversation around the street died instantly. Everybody watched. Linda stood beside the barrier with her clipboard hanging uselessly at her side, while the worker positioned the cutters against the heavy steel links. He hesitated before squeezing the handles. The metal snapped with a loud crack that echoed down Willow Creek Lane like a gunshot. Several people flinched. The chain dropped against the asphalt with a heavy metallic crash. And just like that, the entire balance of power changed. The gate swung open slowly. The first car in line pulled forward cautiously, tires crunching over loose gravel while everyone watched it pass through the opening Linda created and then destroyed less than 24 hours later. Nobody cheered. Somehow that made it worse for her. Silence has a different kind of humiliation. The inspectors continued writing notes, while vehicles slowly started moving again. Traffic untangled itself inch by inch. Delivery trucks resumed routes. Parents rushed kids toward waiting cars. The neighborhood exhaled all at once. But Linda's nightmare was not over yet. The first inspector finished his paperwork and walked back toward her holding a yellow carbon copy form. "This is preliminary notice of unauthorized obstruction pending formal county review." Linda took the paper carefully with both hands. I could tell she already hated the weight of it. She tried one last time to sound composed. "We will of course cooperate fully with any review process." The inspector nodded once. "I recommend you do." Then he looked directly at her. "Because based on the documentation provided today, this situation extends beyond HOA authority concerns." Linda's expression froze completely. Around us, neighbors were listening openly now. Nobody even pretended not to. The inspector continued. "Interference involving designated dependency access corridors can expose responsible parties to county penalties and civil liability review." Somebody behind me whispered, "Oh, she is screwed." Linda heard that too. Her eyes closed for 1 second. Just one. But it was enough. Earlier that morning, she stood beside the gate like a queen inspecting conquered territory. Now she looked like someone trying to survive public humiliation in slow motion. Mr. Patterson stepped closer, holding his coffee cup like he had waited all morning to ask the next question. "Linda, did the board even vote on this?" Silence. Wrong answer. His face hardened immediately. "You put the whole neighborhood at risk without county approval." Linda tried to recover. "We believe the situation fell under visual compliance authority." Nobody cares about visual compliance anymore. The younger woman, still recording with her phone, shook her head in disbelief. "You blocked emergency access over landscaping complaints." Several people started talking at once after that. The crowd was fully against her now. Questions hit from every direction. Who approved the contractor? How much HOA money was spent? Was the board even informed? Did anyone check county records first? Linda could not answer fast enough anymore. That was the moment I realized something important. The inspectors were not actually the thing destroying her authority. The neighbors were. Because once people stop trusting HOA leadership, the structure starts collapsing from inside itself. The first inspector walked over to me while the crowd continued surrounding Linda. He handed back my final copies of the documentation. "You handled this correctly." I nodded once. "Appreciate it." He glanced toward the crowd. Most people escalate these situations emotionally. I looked toward Linda, standing in the middle of growing frustration she created herself. Emotional reactions are temporary. Documentation lasts forever. The inspector smirked slightly at that. Then he headed back toward his truck. I stayed where I was for another minute watching the scene unfold. Linda kept trying to regain control, but every sentence sounded weaker than the one before it. Nobody looked intimidated anymore. That part was over. The illusion was gone. Finally, Linda looked directly at me across the street. There was no anger left in her expression now, just exhaustion. And underneath it, realization. She understood exactly what destroyed her. It was not yelling. It was not threats. It was not revenge. It was one simple mistake. She confused HOA authority with actual ownership. I walked slowly toward my truck for the first time since sunrise. The entire neighborhood watched me cross the exact stretch of asphalt they tried to take away from me. I opened the driver door, then paused. Linda was still staring at me from beside the hanging chain. So I gave her the only final sentence that mattered. You should have checked the land records before you tried to control the road. Then I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove through the open gate while the entire neighborhood watched Linda Whitmore stand beside the broken chain that destroyed her reputation. I thought that would be the end of it. Honestly, most people would have stopped there. The gate was gone. The street reopened. Linda had been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. County officials documented everything. From the outside, it looked finished. But the real collapse did not start until 3 days later. That was when the emergency HOA meeting notice appeared on every mailbox in Willow Creek. Urgent community review regarding recent access incident. The wording alone told me Linda did not write it herself. Too careful. Too nervous. Somebody else on the board was already trying to create distance between themselves and what happened. By then, the story had spread beyond the subdivision. Videos recorded that morning were circulating through local community groups online. People were reposting clips of the chain being cut while neighbors argued in the background. One video focused entirely on Linda standing frozen beside the gate while the county inspector read out unauthorized obstruction violations. Another clip had over 50,000 views because somebody captioned it, HOA president blocks entire neighborhood over landscaping dispute. That one probably hurt the most, especially because it was true. The comments were brutal. Who gave HOA people this much confidence? Imagine risking emergency access over grass complaints. She thought she owned the road. Somebody even uploaded a slowed-down clip of the moment Linda realized county enforcement had arrived. Internet humiliation moves fast, especially when arrogance is involved. I spent most of those 3 days quietly repairing the section of gravel disturbed by the barrier installation. I did not celebrate publicly. I did not post online. I did not give interviews to the local news station that called asking for comment. That confused people more than anger would have. Because the truth was simple. I never wanted a public war. I just refused to lose a private one. On the evening of the HOA meeting, Willow Creek looked completely different than it had a week earlier. Cars lined both sides of the road leading toward the clubhouse. Homeowners who normally skipped HOA meetings suddenly showed up early carrying printed papers and screenshots from county documents now circulating online. The atmosphere no longer felt controlled and polished. It felt tense, curious, dangerous. I parked near the back and walked toward the entrance while conversations immediately lowered around me. People watched me the way people watch somebody returning from a fight everyone expected him to lose. Nobody smiled exactly, but several nodded. Respect changes shape after public conflict. Inside the clubhouse, every chair is full. People stood against walls. Others crowded near the back doors, holding phones ready to record. Linda sat at the front table beneath the HOA logo, looking 10 years older than she had that morning beside the gate. Her posture was still straight, but exhaustion had settled into her face permanently now. Beside her sat the rest of the board. None of them looked happy to be there. One man kept adjusting his tie every 30 seconds like his body was trying to escape the room before the meeting officially started. The HOA attorney sat near the corner flipping through a thick binder while avoiding eye contact with everyone. That alone told me everything. Lawyers only look uncomfortable when they already know the damage is real. The meeting started badly and, somehow, kept getting worse. Residents demanded explanations immediately. Who approved the obstruction? Why was county authorization ignored? Why were homeowners never informed? Was emergency access actually compromised? Did HOA funds pay for the contractor? Every answer Linda attempted only created more questions. Because once trust breaks publicly, people stop accepting vague authority language. They start demanding specifics. Facts, names, documentation, the exact things people like Linda rely on others never checking. Then came the moment that truly ended her. An older man named Richard Holloway stood up from his second row, holding a printed copy of the county violation notice. Richard had lived in Willow Creek longer than almost anyone else. Retired military. Quiet. Respected. The kind of man whose opinion shifts entire rooms without him raising his voice. He looked directly at Linda and asked one sentence. Did you knowingly authorize construction on a county dependency corridor without legal review? The entire room went silent. Linda tried to answer carefully. We believe the matter fell under HOA management discretion based on appearance standards and community integration. Richard interrupted immediately. That is not what I asked. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made it terrifying. Did you knowingly approve it without county review? Linda hesitated. There was again that fatal pause, and this time nobody missed it. Richard slowly nodded once like he had just confirmed something disappointing but inevitable. Then he sat back down and said the sentence that finally destroyed what little authority she had left. You put this community at legal risk because you thought nobody would challenge you. The room exploded after that. Homeowners started arguing over each other. Some demanded resignations. Others demanded financial audits. One woman shouted that her husband was considering legal action after emergency medical access concerns. Another resident accused the board of years of intimidation tactics against homeowners who questioned HOA decisions. The entire structure Linda spent years building started collapsing all at once. Not because of me, because fear stopped working. The HOA attorney finally stood up, trying to regain control. He recommended the board enter executive review regarding potential liability exposure tied to the obstruction incident. That was lawyer language for this situation is becoming dangerous. One of the board members immediately pushed his chair back from the table. I want the record to show I voted against any physical obstruction. Linda turned toward him in shock. Another board member spoke up seconds later. I never approved interference with emergency access. And there it was. The moment every powerful person secretly fears. Isolation. The second consequences become real, everybody starts protecting themselves first. Linda looked around the table and realized she was being abandoned publicly by the same people who spent years supporting her decisions. Nobody wanted to sink beside her. The HOA attorney requested a short recess. During the break, conversations flooded the room like water through broken concrete. People stared openly at Linda now. No fear, no respect, just frustration and disbelief. I stayed near the back wall, quietly drinking coffee from a paper cup, while several homeowners approached me one by one. Not to apologize exactly, more like to acknowledge something. They had watched Linda bully people for years because nobody believed pushing back would matter. Until now, Mr. Patterson eventually walked over, shaking his head slowly. You know what the crazy part is? I looked at him. What? He laughed quietly without humor. She could have just left you alone. Exactly. That was the thing about people addicted to control. They usually destroy themselves, reaching for more of it than they actually need. The meeting resumed 20 minutes later. Linda stood before anyone else could speak. Her hands trembled slightly against the edge of the table. I noticed because it was the first visible sign of weakness she had shown voluntarily. She cleared her throat once, then twice. Finally, she looked out across the room, full of homeowners, no longer willing to protect her authority. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as HOA president. Silence hit harder than shouting would have. Linda lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. The recent access situation created consequences I did not fully anticipate. Several people actually laughed quietly at that. Not cruel laughter, just disbelief. Linda heard it. You could see it hit her. But she kept going anyway. I believed I was acting in the best interest of the community. Richard Holloway answered from the second row without raising his voice. No, you acted like the community belonged to you. That was the final blow. Linda sat down slowly after that, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Not angry anymore. Not powerful. Just tired. The board voted to begin independent review procedures that same night. Financial audits, legal consultation, policy restructuring. Everything Linda once controlled was now being taken apart piece by piece under public pressure. I left before the meeting officially ended. There was nothing else worth watching. Outside, Willow Creek was quiet again. Real quiet this time. Not tense. Not artificial. Just quiet. I walked toward my truck while porch lights glowed across the neighborhood that almost lost control of itself because one woman confused authority with ownership. Then I noticed something near the entrance. The old survey marker beside my driveway. Still there. Half buried in gravel. Ignored by almost everybody except the people smart enough to understand what it meant. I stood there for a second looking at it under the streetlights. Funny thing about land records. They do not care who speaks the loudest at HOA meetings. They do not care who controls the newsletter, the fines, or the neighborhood votes. Paper survives ego. Ownership survives intimidation. And the truth stays exactly where it was recorded long before people like Linda Whitmore ever started pretending they owned things that never belonged to them. I got into my truck and drove home through the same open road they once tried to chain shut. And for the first time since this started, Willow Creek finally understood something simple. The neighborhood never belonged to Linda. It belonged to the people who respected the ground underneath it.